to another holiday here in a couple of weeks, and as we get closer to that, we start to think about charity and charitable organizations. Coming up in our second segment today, we will talk more about the donation efforts that have not only started to pick up steam here within the last couple of weeks, but they really haven't stopped for the last year because of natural tragedies around the world. We'll talk about that in our second segment. First, I want to introduce to you Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates joining us here on the Roundtable. Prosecutor Bates, great to see you again. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us here today. We are coming on the heels this week of getting some closure for families and really the community in the baby Elena Steinfurth case. I wanted to have you on today to kind of talk about getting to the point that we got to. And do you think justice was served in seeing two individuals who essentially contributed to and or killed a child getting 25 years to life, the other one 18 years to life, both with the opportunity for parole? Was justice served?
Well, in my opinion, it absolutely was, and I'll tell you why. You know, cases that go to trial, sometimes not only the trials are extremely traumatic, but, you know, uncertain outcomes, but those cases linger in the court system for years and years and years and years. And sometimes after 10, 15, 20 years, the case is reversed and comes back and we start all over at the beginning. I think one of the things that we were able to do in this case is close the door on that forever. We know who the guilty parties are. We know that they are now convicted of this heinous offense. They are punished, and it is over. There will be no appeal. There will be no, no trial. There will be no more difficulties, at least in the court system. And as far as the parole goes, they're eligible. That does not mean that they will be paroled.
We look at the time factor, and you and I were talking before we came out here today. The initial charges were obstruction of justice, them misleading police on the investigation. That allowed you just to keep them under wraps, if you will, behind bars until the right time came. Is that the case?
Well,
I guess because in the court of public opinion, people really thought they were guilty.
Well, look at it this way. These people were talking about a lost child, some child that has wandered away. The police, they were hamstrung in terms of, looking into a homicide investigation because they were looking for a child, a toddler, wandering away, wandering into the river. So once they realized that they had been misled, they needed to do something. And of course, they charged these two, and then they did search warrants, and they continued to ask questions and to look. And so finally, of course, finding the tiny little remains helped them to answer some of the questions, but not all of the questions. And I think that's the thing, that if this interview, this program does anything, maybe it answers the question to the community as to why would we have made any kind of a concession to these two killers. But those bones and the experts and the police and the investigation only told us so much.
Right. And you said that earlier this week when we heard from you right after the sentencing came down. You feel the community was duped in some sense.
Well, absolutely. I mean, how tragic when a child is lost and everyone gathered to try to find that child and search the vacant houses and the neighborhoods and the shrubbery and the riverbank. And in point of fact, that child was dead in a bag, in a box, in a garage. And how very sad that is. And I think I used the example about those three little boys from Morenci, Michigan, who have been missing since Thanksgiving, I think 3 years ago.
Right.
Think of the pain and anguish that mother has gone through, and all those family members wondering what has happened to those boys. Are those boys harbored somewhere? Are those boys dead? And so we went through some of that in those months from June until September.
Talk to me about it, and this is the frustration for me, and we talked about this as well. I said, I have trouble accepting the fact that sometimes the penalties levied upon adults who kill and or hurt children are lesser than if they would have killed. If this had been, if Elena had been a teenager and or an adult, we might be looking at death sentences for the individual. Isn't that right?
It's hard to say. Once again, when you have a child in a room with two adults and the child ends up dead, who did it? Part of what we have to, and when we're talking about the death penalty, part of what we have to prove in a death penalty case is who is the principal offender. So who did it? So if mom says dad did it, and dad says mom did it, or mom says boyfriend did it, and boyfriend says mom did it, and they're having separate trials, potentially could they both get off? And then we have no answers, and we have no one held accountable.
Is that what we had in this case? He said, she said, going back and forth?
Well, it could be. You don't. At first, they said nothing. They said she was a lost child. Oh my gosh, here's a diaper. There's a proof she must have wandered into the river. And then there was some conversation about the mother having thrown her into the river. And so, of course, they searched the river, but she wasn't in the river.
This looks like a case of child abuse, and then it turned into Stephen King, that we found out in court, finished the job.
And if he had not said that, I don't know that there is any way that we would ever been able to use forensic evidence, or there were no witnesses. The bones did not tell the story about the cause of death. So had he not told us what he had done, I'm not sure we would have ever been able to bring closure in this case, or prevail, or convict him, perhaps, or sentence him, incarcerate him. And I mean, we'd still be perhaps sitting here scratching our head, wondering and tearful.
But were you limited, I guess, when we go back once again, this is the final time I'll ask this, the 25 years, the 18 years, is that the max? Is that the most they could have gotten?
Well, life. There's a life tail there. You have to remember that. And so I think that's an important ingredient, that just because you're parole eligible, you know, in an aggravated murder, you're parole eligible at 20, 25, 30, or you can have life without parole. Of course, we don't know what will happen in the future in terms of our laws, in terms of the death penalty, in terms of, you know, parole. But when you have a life sentence, it just means you might be eligible for parole. It doesn't mean that you'll get parole.
One of the things that you and I spoke about before the interview today, we were talking about in the court of public opinion, people wanting the quick judgment on this case, and you said we've gotten ourselves into this realm of how did you term it, CSI?
The CSI
thinking?
effect. Well, you see it in an hour television show. You see the crime, and then you see a speck of dust that tells you who, what, where, when, and why. And then you see the conclusion. It all happens in 40 minutes. Well, it's not like that in real life, and a speck of dust doesn't necessarily tell us who, what, when, where, and why. And even those tiny little bones did not tell us who, did not tell us what, certainly did not tell us why. All of those answers ultimately came from the killers themselves.
Do you see, when you look at Angela, and when you look at Stephen, what do you see in those two?
Oh, I just see so much sadness, and I think such a shame. You know, a phone call. I think it was Judge Cook that said, a phone call. You know, a trip to the emergency room. You could have saved that child, and you were much more concerned about what people would think about you. But what do people think now? So I mean, to me, it's just a huge, terrible tragedy for our community. It's a very big black eye for us.
How so?
Because this happened here. I mean, we want people to embrace our community, to love it. You have toys in your lobby. This is a wonderful time of year where we should be thankful and giving. And here we are, you know, punishing two people who killed a tiny little helpless, vulnerable child. It's very sad.
At the end of the day, though, you're happy with how the process played out.
It's hard to use the word happy,
but
I guess
that
I
is
say,
a bad choice of words. You're satisfied?
I'm satisfied that we have closed the door. They are in jail. They are not getting out, and we know that they are the ones responsible. So we don't have to wonder who did this. We know who did this.
If you had anything, and I don't recall whether or not you spoke directly to the family members in that during your news conference earlier this week, did you have any words for them, and what were they?
Oh, we absolutely did. Before we talked with the media, we talked with them for probably a good 45 minutes. My words for them was, I am so very sorry. And the fact that this is over does not in any way diminish the pain and suffering that you're going to carry forever. And especially at this holiday time, and I think it's just on the cusp of this child's second birthday. So they're going to carry that forever. You know, the fact that these people are going to go to prison and they're going to be there for a very, very long time doesn't diminish the pain and the anguish that those family members are suffering. And it's very sad.
And something that you and I have talked about in the past too, in interviews that we've done over the years, you've said there is some gratification in closure, and it's almost cathartic. I think you've used the word before.
Well, having the answer as opposed to wondering what happened and who did this and why did they do it.
Prosecutor.
Thank you.
Prosecutor Bates, I really appreciate you taking the time with us this morning. Stay with us. We'll have our second segment coming up right after this.
I'm Tony Geff.